My name is Nicholas Johnson. This is the Nikon D850 and this is a Sony a7S III. We're going to compare them as picture cameras, and this is the Space Warehouse. Okay, so this seems like a stupid comparison to make. I think of it like comparing gas cars, which have been refined and perfected over 100 years, to the early generations of electric cars, with their advanced software and clearly brighter future once everything's worked out. We have on one side the Sony a7S III, a quite new mirrorless camera that seems to have primarily been designed for shooting video. Its sensor, a mere 12 megapixels. And on the other side, a 4-year-old DSLR camera, the Nikon D850, with its 48 megapixel sensor and optical viewfinder. Some say the best DSLR camera ever made. That's 48 million dots that make up the images, 36 million more than the Sony. I've talked about the Nikon D850 before. It's been my main photo shooter for the past couple of years. I travel around taking pictures of race cars and faraway places, and although this thing's a little old now, I have yet to come up against a situation where it can't get the shot I'm after. And even when I miss the framing by a lot in some cases, with 48 megapixels, I can chop off 3/4 of the image and still have something I can turn into print. The D850 has a 3D tracking feature, but I don't ever use it. Mostly because the focus points through the optical viewfinder are a bit spaced out. And for instance, when cars are racing towards me, I want to have more control over the exact point that's going to be in perfect focus. But that thought came before I had the chance to use the focus tracking expanded spot feature in the Sony a7S III. You have what looks like a center point focus spot, but when you hit the AF on button, it activates the tracking, and whatever's in that point just gets locked on and it follows it around the screen. It is bonkers how sticky this tracking point is. As long as it remains in the frame, it will be in focus. It's actually super amazing. And you can use it like back button autofocus, but with a lock on the reframing. So just like I'll use back button autofocus to get focus and then reframe the picture for whatever reason, maybe I want to shove the subject to the side of the frame, this will do that too, but let's just say the subject that I'm shooting is a kid or a dog or something that moves unpredictably and decides to adjust its position after I've already gotten focus. And let's say I'm on a lens that's shooting at like 1.8 or 1.4, where even a tiny bit of movement is going to put him back out of focus. Using this 3D tracking thing, you put the point on your subject, you can move your camera around, it'll keep the focus locked on that subject. Even if they shift their movement a little bit, it'll stay in perfect focus. This is useful. Auto tracking is of course not a necessary function of a camera. As a photographer, I've been shooting without it for the whole time until now, but it is a surprisingly functional one. The Nikon DSLR, all DSLRs, have a purely optical viewfinder, which means you're just seeing the real world through a reflection in a piece of glass, or a tube filled with pieces of glass, as it were. That also means that the optical viewfinder is going to work whether your camera's on or not. The Sony mirrorless, on the other hand, has a tiny, super high resolution, super high refresh rate computer screen inside its viewfinder. While there is an argument to be made for seeing the real world through glass, I'd like to present a counter argument that through the electronic viewfinder, you're able to peer into something a lot closer to the final image product. For example, the exposure you see through the EVF when you're about to take the shot is what the shot is actually going to look like after you take it. If you had just been in a dark place and then you moved outdoors, you literally won't be able to shoot off a super exposed shot on accident. Something I've done more times than I want to admit on a DSLR, because you just see through the glass. It looks like it's exposed properly because your eyes are exposing it, not the camera. This also means that you're able to see your histogram. You can see your audio levels, your battery percentage, and if you want, an immediate review of the picture you just took without taking your face away from the camera. You can go through the menus and make changes in the viewfinder. It's actually super convenient. It's actually way easier than I expected it to be. You can change your shutter speed and see the change in the effect that it's going to have on your pictures right then and there without taking your face away. And in a dark setting, you can ramp up the ISO and actually see when an unacceptable amount of noise is introduced before you even take the shot. The electronic viewfinder, for me, is the difference maker. Almost everything else on the whole camera I can either do without or just do also with the D850. Except for video. The D850 sucks for video. Earlier EVFs weren't very good, but the a7S III is 2048 by 1536. It's a 2K picture inside here. It's more dots than your eyes can even see. It looks like real life. It's as clear as real life, but way more functional. There are obviously pros and cons with each camera. The battery life on the a7S III compared to the D850 is crap, even though it's much improved from their previous generation Sony Alpha cameras. But the thing that I thought would be the main con for the Sony, its lower resolution, isn't nearly as important as I thought it would be. I headed out to the UCF campus, found some horse art, and snapped some pretty pictures with both cameras. I made sure everything was as equal as it could be. I shot on a tripod, both at 50mm, f2.8 in the same settings settings on manual. And to take it a step further, I edited them in Lightroom as close as I could as far as color and exposure to try to isolate just the difference in resolution being what I'm looking at. Now, of course, on a computer screen, even the Sony's mere 12 megapixels of resolution doesn't scale to 100%, so you can't really expect to see any difference in the quality of these two pictures. You might have an opinion on color rendering or some other artifact of the Sony or the Nikon lens or sensor, but that's more subjective than anything. So I printed them out. I printed them out on regular paper. They look exactly the same. I printed them on 13 by 19 photo paper, definitely expecting to be able to clearly see a difference. They look the same. So I printed out one of the pictures from both cameras on the big space printer, the HP 120 at 3 feet wide, and made Sarah and Billy go take a look at them. For reference, these two people both work in the art world and are no strangers to looking at photographs. Here's what happened. And I'm not gonna try to hide anything from you. These two pictures, yeah, one of those is 12 megapixels, the other one is 48 megapixels. Initially, at this distance here, is it easy, is it obvious to you which one is a higher resolution?
The one on the right.
Okay. Okay.
To me, it's the horse here is like a more realistic shine, and he almost looks like blurred out over there a little bit.
This, I don't know. I will say this horse, to me, feels a little sharper. Not like out of focus, but like I feel like there's more, like, okay, see the little bridle thing the horse is wearing on his face? Like there's more contrast in the colors of this one. Oh, I think I just spit.
Billy, can you tell me which one of those two pictures is a higher? One of them has literally 4 times the amount of pixels. The real answer is the fact that Bill is looking for this long is the truth. The truth of the whole thing.
I can't tell if what I'm seeing here is artifact or I can't tell. I don't know. I'm still going with this one.
That's great. The one on the right, you're picking as the higher resolution one.
Yeah.
I'm picking the one on the left.
The one on the left is 48 megapixels. The one on the right is 12 megapixels.
But I agree that this is a better picture.
All right.
Because look of the whole thing. I mean, I guess if
48 megapixels and 12 megapixels, and it's not obvious which is which. If you get right up to the prints, yes, of course there's a difference. But the point is you have to get right up to the print in order to see the difference, and that's crazy. If you zoom in on a computer, there's no question which camera produces a denser set of pixels. But you don't always need to zoom in, and in fact, there's a whole camp of photographers who don't crop their pictures hardly at all. Like, they actually take the picture they intended to take, if you can believe that. So, what's my takeaway? This, the Nikon D850, if you ask me, is the best DSLR camera ever made. It's a camera that I think could be used for professional work, maybe forever. And for me, when I'm shooting race car pictures, I crop like a crazy person. Those things are moving really fast. With 48 megapixels, you can take a team photo and then chop them up into 4 individual headshots that are each easily Instagram quality. But if you're a photographer that really doesn't find yourself cropping at all, you really don't need 48 megapixels at all. Further, it's just gonna slow you down in your editing process because these huge files take a lot longer to render in Lightroom, even with a pretty fast computer. Beyond that, you can blow up 12 megapixels to a billboard. It's all about viewing distance. I imagine if I did like real estate photography or headshots as my main gig, I'd be much more carefully composing each picture rather than just rattling off and cropping in later. On pit road at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, you just don't always have time to frame up what's happening in front of you. If you want to catch the gasoline exploding out of a car because some guy miscalculated what he was doing, you can't be thinking about the rule of thirds and zooming into the perfect amount. You just fire away and crop in later. But the software in the a7S III is, well, it's better. The processor is faster, and since the pixels themselves are physically larger, it can collect more light. Since the sensor has in-body image stabilization, you can go slower on the shutter. The camera itself is physically lighter. The 3D tracking is spectacular and more useful than I expected. This is not just a very, very good video camera. It's actually going to work just fine as a picture camera. I mean, for video, there's really no comparison at all. If this camera is a 9.95 out of 10, the Nikon is like a 4. In Nikon's corner, I will say that my local camera repairman, Kiwi Camera, if you're in the Central Florida area, tells me that when he opens up these cameras to make repairs, the Nikon cameras are much cleaner inside. That is to say that their weather sealing works better. And people argue that EVF blackout during burst shooting makes tracking things hard, but I would say go look at the mirror slapping on a DSLR over and over, and we've always been able to make that work and get shots, so I'm going to be able to get shots with this camera too. I would have never thought that 12 megapixels is enough, but for most cases, it seems like it is. And for me, for race car stuff, this camera has a pixel-dense brother, the a7R4. I think it's getting real close to the time for me to switch everything over to Sony. They won me over with their autofocus in video, something Nikon just hadn't nailed yet by the time I got my a6600. And now that I'm amassing a Sony lens collection anyway for video, it doesn't make a whole lot of logistical sense for me to have a whole second set of Nikon lenses and batteries for shooting pictures. The Nikon D850 is the best DSLR camera ever built. It's a professional grade camera that will continue to be relevant and worthy of professional photography for as long as it continues to function. But DSLRs are at the end of their time. If I had to choose just one of these cameras, it would be the Sony. For right now, I live in a world of consumer excess, and I can just keep them both and use them when they're most useful to me until I buy the very high resolution a7R4 to replace my Nikon D850. And all the lenses that I'm gonna need to go with it. So that's what I'm gonna do. I've been Nicholas Johnson. Nobody gets to the very end of a video, but if you did, subscribe to the channel, please. Goodbye.